They confessed to Juman's murder, yet Bola and Johnson were never charged under the PPP government.
But guess what? Thank God, though, in 2016, they were charged. And you know who was in office in 2016, right? Yes, the coalition government headed by President David Otto Granger. Now, let's go back to this here. As you can see, the body of Juman, a mechanic, was pulled from the hotel's pool on November 19th, 2012. And Bola and Johnson were arrested with his murder on December 1st, 2016. Now, let's break this down. Yeah, sorry about that, guys. Yep, there's a repeat, a rebroadcast, something that's happening. So let me just apologize for that. You know, we're not a little sloppy here, but let's get back to business. So if this young man was murdered, and the evidence is quite clear that he was murdered in 2012, nothing happened. Well, at that time, Para Jagdeo was still the General Secretary of the PPP. But where was Irfan Ali? Okay, Irfan Ali was the Minister of Housing and Water. Okay, fair. Yeah, he was there. Who was the Attorney General there at that time? Anil Nandalal. So the question is, and who was the police commissioner that they were controlling during that time? And in 2012, who was it that was the commissioner of police? Was it Leroy Brummel, or did this guy Henry Green probably died? Yep. Yeah, good. So maybe it was Leroy Brummel, or who was it Prasad? Somebody double check on that. It could have been Prasad at that time, or Leroy Brummel. Now, the question I'd like to ask you guys, as we look at the political connection possibility, high political connection in the PPP regime, if this murder occurred in 2012 under the PPP regime, the question is why it took the APNU AFC government, under the APNU AFC government, from 2012 to 2016, over 4 years before the murder suspects were actually charged. That's the question I'm asking you guys. Now read between the lines what happened from 2012 to 2016, 2012 when the PPP was in office, to 2016 when the coalition got in office. That's the time that they were charged. Nobody touched them during the PPP years in office. No, absolutely not. Are you reading between the lines, right? Good. Let's move on. What else is it? Bej Narain Bola, 29, a manager of Doubleday Hotel at Tushan, East Bank, Essequibo, and his driver. Well, now we're hearing that Leland Johnson, 26, was his driver. And they walked free. Not yesterday, of course, but when it was called up at the magistrate's court, following the conclusion of the trial for the 2012 murder of Sadiq Juman. Okay, walk free, even with all of the evidence. And you can just imagine what this mother and Juman's relatives endured at that time, and they continue to this day. Just imagine. Now, take a look at this, the postmortem here. The postmortem examination found that he died from asphyxiation, and that blunt trauma, to the head. Blunt trauma to the head. Now, they try to argue that he plunged and hit his head. All right. Defense lawyers may argue that. But look, it says, but the arguments put forward to the court were that his injuries could have been sustained and from Juman, and that they were arguing that he plunged and he hit his head. Are you guys with me on this, right? He plunged and he hit his head. Right, Theodore Adams and Deborah Clark? That is what the defense lawyer, that is what the defense lawyer argued. Right, Hazel Johnson? Hazel Johnson's affectation. Okay. Leroy Brummel was the commissioner of police. Thank you so much. And so now look, at the time of the discovery, there were visible marks of violence about his body, and his head was swollen. Visible marks of violence about his body. This young man, visible marks of violence about his body. His relatives were convinced that he was murdered, since his personal belongings, including his clothing, which he had removed before taking a dip, his smartphone, and his wallet were missing. The mother and other relatives of this young man are of the view that he was murdered. He was murdered. They maintain that to this day. And the suspects remain, to this day, the son, owner of the hotel, Bojnarain or whatever, Bola, and that guy, Leland Johnson. Now, I say that to say that if you take a look at what, and let's go back, police sources say, and I want you guys to listen to this particular point carefully. Police sources say that suspects have confessed. Suspects have confessed that Juman was afterward beaten until he fell unconscious. The men then removed his body to a room in the hotel. However, after realizing that he had died, they then reportedly dragged his body into the pool to make it appear as though he drowned. Does this all sound familiar with what happened to Adriana Young? Does this all sound familiar, guys? I'll repeat. Police sources say that suspects have confessed that Juman was afterward beaten until he fell unconscious. The men then removed his body to a room at the hotel. However, after realizing that he had died, they then reportedly dragged his body into the pool, In other words, beat him, according to the report, mind you, beat him mercilessly, then dragged his body and placed it into the very pool. Kind of like the same pattern of Adriana Young, to make it appear that he drowned. Consistency in what happened back then to what happened to Adriana Young. Consistency, right? This is why the father and others and the mother and no one could believe the story of Adriana Young, other than the fact that she was murdered. Similar pattern, same sort of pattern. And we all are going to stick to this view that Adriana Young was murdered. For what? Only God knows. We don't know whatever else happened to Adriana Young. We just don't know, because the truth is being concealed.